Hello, my friends, and welcome back to another Poetry Thursday. I apologize, it's been a couple of Thursdays since I've done a poem, but I wanted to make sure I did not miss it again, uh, with Thursdays being relatively busy sometimes. I've been working my way this week through the Song of Roland, which is an epic poem, this particular version translated by Robert Harrison, and I definitely have some thoughts on it so far, and there will be a full video on that when I wrap it up. And that's not the poem that I'm going to be reading out of today. But the shortcomings, if you will, that I'm experiencing in there had me thinking of a battle poem that I really do enjoy, that I think you might enjoy as well. It's significantly shorter than this. It's about 8 pages long in my copy of the Anglo-Saxon World, an anthology, and it's freely available online. I'll have a free copy linked in the description down below because I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I'm going to read it enough to give you a taste of the Battle of Maldon, which is a pretty major battle, I believe in the 900s, that helped shape the path and the course that England took between the time of Alfred the Great and the Battle of Hastings in 1066. And it starts with ... So this is a fragment. It's not a complete poem. We don't have all of it. It was not completely preserved and survived throughout the years. But what we do have, I think you may agree, is pretty darn fun and interesting, and serves as a good contrast to modern poetry. If you'll remember, alliterative verse is a popular method of portraying poetry back in those times. And alliterative verse being where it's not really worrying about rhyme scheme so much as it's got repetition of the same sound throughout each line, and usually 3 to 4 times, usually 2 in the front half and then 1 or 2 in the back half, and oftentimes in an iambic pentameter or something similar in terms of a beat. But even that, the rhythm wasn't as big of a deal so much as the alliterative presence throughout. It was shattered. Then Bertnoth ordered every warrior to dismount, drive off his horse, and go forward into battle, with faith in his skills and with bravery. Thus Offa's young son could see for himself that the earl was no man to suffer cowardice. He bent his best falcon flying from his wrist to the safety of the forest and strode into the fight. Thereby one could well see that the youth would not be weak in the turmoil of battle. Eadric was firmly resolved to follow his leader into the fight. At once he hurried forward with his spear. He feared no foe. For as long as he could lift his shield and wield a sword, he kept his word that he would pierce and parry before his prince. Then Byrhtnoth began to marshal his men. He rode about and advised. He told his men how they should stand firm, not yielding an inch. He bade them grasp their shields in their hands tightly and upright, and not be afraid. After he had urged on his army to the utmost, he dismounted with his new escort at a carefully chosen place, where he knew his most faithful men were waiting. Then a Viking spokesman stood on the river bank and bellowed a message from the seafarers to Byrhtnoth, the earl, on the opposite bank. The brave seafarers have sent me to say to you that they will be so good as to let you give gold rings in return for peace. It is better for you to buy off our raid with tribute than that we, so cruel, should cut you down in battle. We need not destroy one another. If you agree to this, we'll settle for peace in exchange for gold. If you, most mighty over there, wisely decide to disband your men, giving money for peace to the seafarers on their own terms, and make a truce, we'll take to the sea with the tribute you pay and keep our promise of peace. Then Byrhtnoth spoke. He grasped his shield and brandished his slender ashen spear, resentful and resolute. He shouted his reply. Can you hear, you pirate, what these people say? They will pay you a tribute of whistling spears, of deadly darts and proven swords, weapons to pay you, pierce, slit, and slay you in the storm of battle. Listen, messenger, take back this reply. Break the bitter news to your people that a noble earl and his troops stand over here, guardians of the people and of the country, the home of Ethelred, my prince, who will defend his land to the last ditch, will sever the heathens' heads from their shoulders. We would be shamed greatly if you took our tribute and embarked without battle, since you barged so far and brazenly into this country. No, you'll not get your treasure so easily. The spear's point and sword's edge, savage battle play, must teach us first that we have to yield tribute. Then Byrhtnoth gave word that all his warriors should walk with their shields to the river bank. The troop on either side could not get at the other, for there the flood flowed after the turn of the tide. The water streams ran together. They thought it too long before they were able to clash their spears. The East Saxons and the ship army beset the river Panta in proud array, and yet no warrior could injure another, except by the flight of a feathered arrow. The tide ebbed. The pirates stood ready, many bold Vikings eager for battle. Then Byrhtnoth, guardian of the men, ordered a warrior to defend the ford. He was Wulfstan, Ceola's son, the bravest of brave kin. With his spear he pierced the first seafarer who stepped unflinching onto the ford. Two proven warriors stood with Wulfstan, Aelfheir and Maccus, both brave men. Nothing could have forced them to take flight at the ford. They would have defended it for as long as they could wield their weapons. When they saw that they found the guardians of the ford too fierce for their liking, the hateful strangers began to use guile and asked if they could cross, leading their warriors over the water. Then, in foolhardy pride, the earl allowed those hateful people access to the ford. The son of Byrhthelm began to call out across the cold water. The warriors listened. Now the way is clear for you. Come over to us quickly. Warriors to the slaughter. God alone can say who will control the field of battle. Then the slaughter wolves, the horde of Vikings, waded to the west across the river Panta. The seafarers hoisted their shields on high and carried them over the gleaming water. Byrhtnoth and his warriors awaited them ready for battle. He ordered his men to form a shield wall and stand firm against the enemy. Then the battle, with its chance of glory, was about to begin. The time had come for all doomed men to fall in the fight. The clamor began. The ravens wheeled and the eagles circled overhead, craving for carrion. There was shouting on earth. They sent their spears hard as files, and darts, ground sharp, flying from their hands. Bowstrings were busy, shields parried point. Bitter was the battle. Brave men fell on both sides, youths choking in the dust. And that's, I think, where I'll stop. So it's got a couple more pages. It's got a good length more to go. And I absolutely love the poem of the Battle of Maldon. I think I'm very thankful that we have the portion of the poem that we do, because it just helps to come alive what it would feel like a little bit to be on that battlefield, to experience the chaos, the clashing of two forces together. The attempts when one side realizes that they can't gain access the way that they intended to try to connive and convince their way to get across, and then the foolhardiness of one side and saying, come on, come across, we'll do battle all on one side, which actually historically did happen, which makes absolutely no sense if you think about it, other than in the heat of the moment you make those stupid decisions that you feel like, oh, of course we're going to defeat them, we've got them on their heels, why not let them come over, we'll still crush them. If you haven't heard about the Battle of Maldon, how that all plays out, that might be a fun thing for you to just go hop on Wikipedia and check out a little bit about the Battle of Maldon, because it's a pretty cool battle. It's a very important one, not one that has a lot written about it, at least that I know of. I'm sure Steve Donahue's probably got about 40 books that he could recommend off the top of his head that specifically focus on the Battle of Maldon and, to prove me wrong. And I'd be happy with that. I'd love to have a Battle of Maldon book on my shelf if one certainly does exist. And the poetry is very different than the poetry style that we're used to these days, where you don't have that necessarily that strict rhyme scheme that you would associate with anyone pretty much Shakespeare through the Romantics. It doesn't have a rhyme scheme that you would expect to find in all of those. But it definitely has a cadence and a rhythm that you can easily fall into, even in translation. And that's one of the things I think ends up being my issue with Song of Roland that's going to come up is it's probably an issue of the translation, because the translation I have is not poetic at all. It has no rhythm, it has no rhyme, it has no alliteration. It just feels like lines of prose, which there's nothing wrong with that. But compared to other great poems that I enjoy, Beowulf, the Iliad, the Odyssey, the Aeneid, the Battle of Maldon, for crying out loud. It just lacks a little something, at least in this translation from the Old French. And I can't put my finger on it, but I think that's part of what it is that essence of the poetic style that is not preserved in there. And so until I have more exposure to the poem itself, it may be harder to gain an appreciation. While it's an incredibly readable poem, it just it lacks something. Sorry, I'm getting off on tangent. It's late at night, Wednesday night. I wanted to make this video before turning in because I wanted it to be up for you, wonderful watcher, viewer, fan of poetry, hopefully fan of medieval poetry. By the end of the next, year or so, I'm going to keep hammering away at it with you. Thank you for watching. I'm sorry for the rambles.